Are we doing this?
Sure, how do you like the camera
I
angle?
have to make sure I'm flexing at all times.
Yay!
There, now we look centered.
Which is so weird because it's not centered at all.
Today, what we're going to be talking about is why you should not do a podcast.
Basically.
As if we've been taking our own notes this whole time, like, this was a terrible idea because of this.
The do's and don'ts. I feel like we have more perseverance
We're stubborn, is what he means.
to get this
That's
done.
the translation.
But we wanted to give people kind of an insight of what it looks like into content production, what is happening on the back end of all this that nobody sees.
For today, we're going to post a picture, and if you're watching this on YouTube, I'll probably clip it in, of what we are staring at versus what you're seeing right now, because those are two very different things. The amount of soft pillows and things that are in this room.
1, 2, 3 monitors, a full computer, 2 mics, 2 boom arms.
So today, just to give you an idea of what we're going to be walking through, I'm going to put on my teacher hat for a second, Mr. Brown, and give you an idea of what we're going to be talking about. Because ultimately, like Ben mentioned in the intro, we don't want people to be thinking, oh, I'm just going to do this and knock it out, and then you waste all the time and money. Don't do that. These are reasons why not to do that. Here they are. For one, content. That's actually a really big hurdle. Coming up with something one time, not a big deal. Maybe 5 times, not a big deal. But when you start to get into week to week, you're trying to put out content, or if you're making even a post daily, that gets a little taxing.
It gets so difficult.
I told Ben, I was like, hey, could you start making like just one video a week? And he's like, sure. And then about 3 hours later, he's like, that took a lot longer than I thought it was going to. And I was like, welcome to every day. So content is the first one. Time management, which applies to plenty of things outside of even a podcast. Yeah. Welcome. And will/perseverance, I call it glorified stubbornness. Being able to push through when you don't see numbers, you don't see any results. You're clicking on your host site and seeing if any percentages, and did anybody listen to it today? That kind of thing. You're tracking it to see if you get that attention, to get that ball rolling. What does that look like? And then last but not least, once you have all those other things, how do you delegate responsibilities? Because what may sound obvious usually is not. Common sense is not as common as would make sense. So what we want to do is walk through all of the roadblocks that would prohibit you from having a successful podcast, which, big caveat, we are far from successful. We just are continuing to roll. Now, we may have tripped and we're rolling downhill, so it's just less of us and more of gravity. But either way, we're still going, so we're counting it a win. And if we can help anybody along the way with figuring out what not to do and why not to start a podcast, then this video is for you.
Yep. So what we're doing is we're co-hosting in different cities. If you're doing this by
Currently, as we video this,
yeah.
We're in different...
No, we're not in different cities now. But normally when we record, so this is something that we're trying, and we're seeing if it'll work. So far, I like it just because I like the energy in the room. It's
very different.
It's different hearing you in my head versus like being able to look at you and you can
look deep
see
into my
that
eyes.
I'm calling you stupid with my eyes, or that I love you.
I thought that's just how you look at me. Now I know, folks. One of the caveats that we need to make here is that obviously we are not the same person. So when you have a podcast and you have a solo host, that is probably going to make a lot of things easier, but then also some things more difficult. So there's a trade-off. When you're delegating responsibilities, well, guess what? If you're by yourself, that's all you got. You don't have anybody else to be like, hey, could you do this thing? Nope. False. You get to do all of it. So pros and cons to both of those situations. We only know what it's like to have 2 people involved, start to finish, that sort of thing. And we'll probably even discuss how that dynamic has shifted along a spectrum over time as we have continued to produce this podcast. Because where one of us started doing most of the work It has then started to get more towards an even spread, but that's our dynamic, and we work with it, and we communicate through it. So if you're solo, I would bet editing
Gotta be
audio
so easy.
Your opinion is all that matters, really. So you don't have to be like, hey Ben, check this out and see what you think about it. Or if there's a post that maybe one of us disagrees with, but one of us doesn't.
Has happened already.
It has. So you have to be able to communicate if there's two of you, and if there's only one of you, guess what? It's all you.
But now you have to own those decisions as opposed to, I can blame Micah.
So the difference would be then multiple people. So that's where we're going to spend most of our time here, talking about what that dynamic looks like, how we operate. The biggest wrench in the whole thing is that we're in two very different cities, 3 hours apart from each other. Thank God it's 2020. Ultimately, you have a lot of technology at your fingertips as a duo. The bad part about that is so does everyone else. So whenever we're using, in our case, Discord to record, if it's a Friday night, we would not be able to record because the internet connection would be cutting out enough that it does not make a clear recording. So that's very difficult. Some of you may have noticed this in some of our episodes. There's little blips where my voice typically cuts out. That's because Ben is recording into his computer, so his audio is just, you're right there. So it's not going anywhere. But mine is getting sent over the Wi-Fi into his computer and recorded. So sometimes that can be an issue. On top of that, things that are open on your computer can slow down your internet connection, which then leads into whether or not I'm able to talk clearly. Is it on Wi-Fi? Is it on Ethernet? I had an old computer before. Ethernet was preferred. Now I'm on a new computer, and somehow Wi-Fi is better.
Technology, I think.
Say ketology?
Technology.
Oh, okay.
Did I have trouble with words there?
I don't know.
Say
what expectations versus assumptions.
I don't want to.
Behind the scenes, that was one of the most funny, difficult things that Ben's ever had to say.
I'm going to say it, and I'm going to butcher it. I can't say expectations versus assumptions. I said it.
Hey, you did it!
Dang it!
I'm so proud of you. You're growing up so fast.
I'm gonna say it fast now. Ready? Expectations versus assumptions.
You tripped. Why did you have to do that? Quit while you're ahead.
Expectations versus assumptions. It's the verses. The verses and assumptions.
Assumptions.
Yeah, it's that.
Assumptions.
It's the phonetic in
my
there.
tongue when I was sleeping, so I can't pronounce words. That's my excuse anyway.
My mouth won't do it.
Timing. We talked about time management. What does your world look like before I talk about the Rubik's Cube of my life?
What do you mean? And just
time management. Like when you try to schedule things with me, what does that look like?
Most of the time I have a more flex schedule. So a lot of the time I can work my schedule to fit the needs to do this. I don't think we've ran into an issue yet.
Well, and what do you do?
What do you mean?
What's your profession?
Oh, I sell real estate. So I sell real estate in Houston. So
inherently that's a little bit more flexible because you kind of get to decide your schedule.
Yeah. I set my buyer. I pick my buyers. I pick my sellers. I set my own appointments. Based on my time available. So everything. I mean, essentially, I'm running my own business. So within that, I've got the flexibility to work to you, but at the same time, there still is that aspect of we have to get our schedules to line up. Nikki and I have been in this really weird transitional place in life with really where we live and where we're working and just life in general. Things may be transitioning in the next couple months. We're really not sure, but up until this point, I've had the flexibility to work around your schedule, and that's been good.
My own schedule does not have the flexibility to work around my own schedule.
It does not. I don't have littles running around.
Yeah. In my world, time management, as much as I may try, it's not manageable. The biggest variable is Charlotte. And it's also Lily, but Lily's like young. She's not talking back or whatever. She just kind of squawks at me. Not a big deal. It's loud, but whatever. So if something's going on with Charlotte, maybe that creates a domino effect with Elizabeth not being able to handle what's going on with Charlotte. So then I may not be able to record at that moment. I may need to go handle that or just be there for Elizabeth.
Right.
And be like, hey, Elizabeth needs a break. I gotta go take care of this.
Yeah.
That's my priority. The other side of that is that Elizabeth also works. full-time at Facebook. So when she has meetings, I'm full double hands, like
Dad.
taking care of the kids.
Yep.
And sometimes, for those of you listening, you might know what I'm talking about. Sometimes that looks like physically being present and making sure that Charlotte is working on a puzzle versus making a mess, or painting outside versus painting inside where she can make a mess. That could also look like making sure that Lily is not rocking and then falls backward and hits her head on the ground. Not ideal, because then she's screaming, and if Elizabeth's on a video conference call, then Lily's screaming, and that's on the video conference call, and then she wants mom because the boob. And
all of a sudden, the world's on fire.
It's on fire. And while she's screaming, Charlotte has no situational awareness. And so she's like, Daddy, I need more paper. I'm like, your sister's crying. Oh, it's okay, Lily. Daddy, can I draw? We don't just jump to the next thing. That's kind of what my world looks like. So being able to try to schedule like a confirmed, this is when we're going to record kind of time, is tough to do, and it takes coordinating Ben's schedule, because sometimes he does have a full like, oh, I'm totally swamped this Tuesday.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry. Can we do Wednesday? Then I go to Elizabeth, and she's like, well, I'm used to you doing on Tuesday, so I actually have meetings at this time. And if she has meetings at not those times, then is that a time when the kids are down for a nap, or is that a time that she needs to take them somewhere else? And so I'm dealing with all that on my end. This is a big reason to not have a podcast. You need to understand that this is not just something that you're like, oh, we're going to hit record. That was a switch that I just flipped. We're going to hit record as if this is the 70s. Like, I'm thinking like Queen or something like, all right, now we're switching on. We're going to light it up.
That just made me think of Space Force. He's like, we don't need a button cover.
Yes.
He's like, dang it.
Anyway, don't just think that you're going to turn on the microphone and start talking. I would argue that if you don't plan ahead, and this kind of then moves into more so the content, if you don't plan ahead, you're probably going to have either a boring podcast that may start off really good, but then you start to trail.
Yeah, it fizzles out because you don't have a consistency.
Yeah, you don't have a pattern or whatever. Or you have a somewhat entertaining podcast, but there's not really a takeaway. Like, okay, you just talked my ears off for 10 minutes.
But why?
Yeah, I have no idea why you're talking to me.
Why am I here?
Yes, why did I just waste my time?
Right.
Other than driving to the grocery store or something to listen to this. When we put together content and we're talking about, gosh, even when we did the obstacles episode, we were talking about how to overcome obstacles.
That was our second one, wasn't it? First or second?
No, because we did
first 5.
Small disciplines lead to big wins, and then we did 4 episodes of marriage stuff. And then somewhere in there we did obstacles, because we did our stories.
Yeah, it was towards the beginning.
So, yeah. Either way, we were talking about obstacles, and that sounds like a really easy, like, let's just... it's an obstacle.
Yeah.
Well, so I'm going to talk about obstacles today. And when you reach an obstacle, you got to deal with that obstacle. And sometimes obstacles are big, sometimes obstacles are small. But either way, like, we're all going to face obstacles. Now, right now, you're probably listening to this and you're like, I'm going to reach through the camera and strangle you. Because I've said obstacle probably 17 times in 30 seconds.
Obstacle.
Which is an obstacle to listening. Either way, if you don't have an outline of like, we're going to start here, here's the main point, and here's the sub points of what we're trying to talk about, wrap it up, put a nice bow on it. People aren't going to know what the heck you even talked about. Why did I even just listen to this podcast that's talking about obstacles? But I'm no better off having listened to it. And I think that's where my background as a teacher comes in, because having the master's degree of how do people learn?
Yeah.
And how do you break down content and information, regardless of what it is, into a way that's digestible for you listening, that there's at least one thing that you can take away from every episode that you listen to. Yeah. This was a good one to talk about in person, because we can see each other and read body language.
Yeah.
I remember when I was like, hey, we should write an outline to keep us like on track and make sure like we talk about what we want to talk about, no more, no less. And Ben was like, well, that, I mean, yeah, but I really like organic, like just hit record and like just see what happens. And I was like, okay, if it's cool with you, I'm still gonna write an outline and like we'll see what happens. And Ben's like, yeah, sure.
I don't like this story.
and then we started recording. We get done. Ben's listening to it, like playback to edit it, and he's like, I don't even know where I went for like 6 minutes there. I was telling a story that had nothing to do with what we were talking about. Like, where did I go?
My brain does this weird thing where I'll have a point, and then once I get into that point, within myself, I'm like, oh, but there's other good points here too. And so I'll start rabbit trailing. And then we get somewhere and I'm like, wait, what were we talking about? And then Mike is like, we were talking about this. And then I have to go all the way back. I'm like, oh, yeah. So outlines are really useful. What? You were right.
What's funny is like those are conversations that happen when we record. And then Ming goes, we're gonna have to pause because I totally lost my train of thought. And then I hear him like, I can hear it like through your headphones into the microphone. You're like listening back and you're like,
go back over
caught it. Okay,
where I tangented.
Record.
At least I know that's how I operate. Like,
yeah.
it's still.
I'm just telling people like they don't see that.
That's
they just
true.
See the finished product.
So that's how my brain works. Is like I'll start a point and then it rabbit trails and like before you know it, like we were going to the moon and now
you're like, is that a shooting star? I could have Ben, that's a satellite.
Ben.
Oh, we have a satellite up here? No, that's the ISS. Oh. Wait, didn't they just launch somebody to the ISS like a few days ago? No, they had to reschedule the launch. Oh, okay. I wonder how long like you could live on the ISS with no like physical damage. So we went from launching to the moon to how long can you live in space?
And I'm like all about that conversation.
All 7 of them.
Yes.
At the same time.
Unfortunately, one of the other hurdles is keeping your co-host on point, I think. I feel like you babysit. I'm sorry.
No, I think that you got to do it in a tactful and loving way. I'm not trying to bring you down. Ever.
You don't.
But
I am very. I'll go here and then it's.
I'm trying to not distract our audience as well.
Continue.
That's the other.
We're here for you.
But this is behind the scenes. So if you have a partner that you're like, dude, we should do a podcast. Think about the interpersonal dynamic. Ben and I have had some pretty tough conversations that we've even talked about on the podcast, but between us, and even since we started the podcast, and yet we know that at the end of the day, I'm his friend. Period. So bring up what you want. Tell me I'm being a total a-hole about. Hey, you're really tough to be a friend to.
Actual words.
It's really hard to be your friend. That's what he said, and I was like,
"Oh,
I'm really sorry."
Actually, your response was, "Oh, I remember."
Oh.
So what it is? I said that because it was the conversation needed to be had, and you just said the look in your face is just, "Oh,"
just like that's how I felt. And then we found out, like, Ben didn't realize how highly I thought of him. And I was like, I am so sorry that what I felt in my head is not what you experienced and what you felt. So let's make sure those two
I'm not as thick-skinned as I thought I was.
It's true. Hard-headed and thick-skinned are two very different things. All right. So talking about the perseverance real quick. If you don't have tough skin and you aren't a hard-headed individual, this is not something to do. Because if you've never had an experience like being in real estate, or for me being a financial planner, where you're trying to build your own thing, it's going to be a bunch of micro advances,
tiny.
That over time you see like, oh shoot, we actually did walk a mile.
The bigger picture.
Yeah.
I watched a podcast this morning. What's Gary Vaynerchuk? I want to say Vaynerchuk.
Call him Gary V.
And he talks exactly that. And it's kind of like what we talked to you at the beginning of the episode. It's these tiny little steps you're not going to see every day, but then you look back and you're like, oh my gosh. He also went into how things that are instant, like viral videos or you get famous all of a sudden, usually don't last. Like success, instant success, usually is not sustainable.
Or it's actually not instant.
Yeah.
Those are the two things.
Yeah,
like you could have a total fluke accident and you're famous for a hot second, and then that's it.
Yeah.
If you pop up and all of a sudden are insta famous, and not like Instagram, I mean like instantly famous, and you stay in the limelight, it's actually because you weren't insta famous. You were doing all the disciplines, and all of a sudden you had a break.
You had a platform. You had the platform and
you
the
launched.
views, and essentially people were like, "Oh, I like this person." Bam. And I think that's where like people like Sean. Sean has a solid base on his YouTube channel, and where it's not 20 million subscribers. Sean has
only 156,000.
Only 156,000. Well, because people, and this is also another point, is people think of success in stuff like this as like, oh, you got to have 10 million views, you got to have 2 million views. And the reality of the situation is Sean has a sustainable income with his YouTube channel. He can maintain his family, and people like forget that you don't have to be limelight. You don't have to be Hollywood. You don't have to be somebody super famous in order to be successful on the internet. We have a successful podcast, have a successful YouTube. It's all about the little, like you said, the little, steps that
I said micro advances.
Micro
I couldn't
advances.
think of a better
baby steps.
buzzword.
Just steps.
Baby steps.
Baby steps. Steps to get to where you want to go, and stuff like content on the internet. I mean, think about the internet. It's a big place. A lot of content.
Very entertaining place sometimes. So having that perseverance to push through, regardless of you may not see the outcome.
Yeah.
That's going to take a toll on your determination. We only recently hit 1,000 listens. 1,000. Not a lot, but to hit that milestone was a big deal to us. Yeah. I'm also very much a silver lining person, so I'm like, we had 8 listens today. We only had 2 yesterday, so let's freaking go. That kind of thing.
And see, that's the thing is, I'm the opposite of that. Is I want the big numbers.
Why do we not have 1,000 today?
Well, no, but it. Well, no. We had a conversation earlier about my verbiage, and I just did something that Micah called to.
Oh, yeah.
Well, no, I agree with you, but I say no.
It's I told him it's like improv. Whenever somebody's doing improv, like comedy, you always agree with whatever was just said, and then you add to it, you build on it. But it's funny because he generally agrees, but he'll lead with, "No, I mean it's totally that, and it's blah blah blah."
I agree with you, but you're wrong. Doesn't set a good tone. I don't think. I just kind
of sit there and go, just give it a second. Anyway, please continue.
Train of thought, lost it, gone.
You want the big numbers?
Big number. That's where I feel we are. Yeah, you had to reel me in. It's we're very alike, but we're very different. I think what
we're very alike. We have different strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, and I think where you shine, I'm not so good in, and where I have a skill set, you're not so good in, and it kind of balances itself out.
Yeah.
So,
or sometimes you're like, hey, so when I pick a video camera, I'm like, Ben, I did this for 4 years, right, with a video camera. Oh, so you know what this means?
I have a lot of knowledge and a little bit of... I'm like a jack of all trades. I feel like I know a little bit about a lot of stuff, but I'm not like super knowledgeable in any one thing, except real estate. But it's because what I do for a living.
I'm not super knowledgeable in many areas at all.
I feel like... I don't know. It's a controversial statement. Continuing, sorry.
Before we get into kind of like the responsibilities, there are a few different aspects that we want to break down for you that maybe you haven't thought of. So if you're thinking about a podcast, let's break it down real quick. You have to do voice capture. So how are you doing that? What program are you going to be using? Are you going to be using something that's reliable? If you're in 2 different cities, are you going to be using Zoom? Are you going to be using Discord? Have you even ever heard of Discord? Mm-hmm. Is there something else that you might not have heard of? You need to make sure that you have a reliable software and equipment. We have a microphone up here. We have a microphone over there. That one's not plugged in because it's mine and whatever. But We've got equipment, we've got software. You have to make sure that you can actually record, because after all, that is the fundamental basis for an entire podcast. If you don't hear them, the podcast literally doesn't exist.
Yep.
So
video capture, audio capture. We're doing video capture because we're doing stuff on YouTube, but audio capture, there's 1,000 different ways to do it, and it's all preference, what works for you and your setup. I don't think there's any right or wrong way to set up a podcast or set up a YouTube channel, set up a stream, whatever. It's however you want people to perceive you and how you want people to present yourself. You will have the equipment to match whatever that expectation within you is. So there's 1,000 different ways to get to the finish line with recording, is my point.
Yeah, I would say the only right versus wrong way is, does it work or does it not work? Like, can you actually record your voice and then send it out, or not?
Yeah.
If you can, then that's the wrong way.
So we ran into an issue with file formats from Mac to PC.
Yes.
So we ran into MOV versus MP4 and how that renders down, and there's a lot of tech and a lot that goes on the back end that recording's the easy part.
You may not have known this. You need a hosting site with an RSS feed. To date, I don't know what those letters stand for, but I do know that you need a feed to be able to then post to Apple Podcast or Spotify or wherever else. YouTube is totally different because it's a host site in and of itself that then
directly to
distributes. The way I explain it, so if you're wondering what the heck you're supposed to be doing or not doing, if you think that you could just record an MP3 and distribute it, you're going to have a hard time. You essentially need... You're searching for... If you think you just have an MP3... Follow me, this is going to be a great analogy here. You're searching for a TV, when what you need is a cable provider or a streaming service. So you may have a TV with a Fire Stick, but you don't have Hulu, you don't have Netflix, you don't have HBO or whatever else. Disney Plus in my house. You know what I'm saying? The point is this: if you have your MP3, that's like having a Fire Stick it's not connected to anything. Cool. You bought a Fire Stick. Great. You recorded your MP3. Now what are you going to do with it? So instead of trying to upload it to your one TV, you want to upload it to the cable provider and send it out to everybody else's TVs. That's the difference. So if you don't know how to do that, either don't start a podcast, because right now you're like, yeah, this sounds like way too much work, or start to figure it out. We use Podbean. I had never heard of it until I asked somebody else, hey, you do a podcast? Could you please tell us how the heck we need to host this site or whatever? And he's like, oh yeah, Podbean, it's free. Turns out it wasn't free for what we were trying to do, but nonetheless, it is what it is. Having guests on, that is a whole new dynamic. I told Ben I didn't want to have a guest on. I didn't even want to try to do a video until we had done 10 episodes.
Yeah.
Because in my mind, there's nothing special about the 10 mark. It's just I wanted to have a measure where when we hit that number, we had at least done enough to where we kind of figured out our dynamic.
Comfortable.
And we knew what we were doing with some of the basics to then branch out into videos, branch out and having special guests on, that sort of thing. And so
people aren't looking at us and thinking we're unprofessional because we're new to this, basically. So we wanted a baseline to work off of. We know what we're doing. Yep. We know what we're talking about. This works. Now let's bring in other people.
Think about Amazon. If you don't know the history of Amazon, the company, they started with books, and they did that really well. Mm-hmm. And what they ended up hitting was a tipping point. You should read the book The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. He talks about this happening for all major companies. You can even break it down to different celebrities. I hope that we hit a tipping point with this show where all of a sudden your growth becomes exponential.
Yeah.
And you can look at the income or the revenue for Amazon over the course of years, and it's just like this steady incline, and all of a sudden it just goes whoop up. And that's the tipping point. For whatever reason, the exponential growth triggers to where I tell one person, then Ben tells another one person, and I go tell this one person, and then they're telling 2 people, and then 4 people, and then from there on, you then can reach a tipping point. So if you are having guests on, make sure that you know what you're doing first before you ever hit the tipping point, before you ever get there. That's fine. Just make sure you have your base first. Sell books first, then move on to literally selling anything and everything. Except your microphone, apparently.
No, I found it.
Oh, okay.
I found it. They literally sell...
They'll sell you groceries,
almost
in case
anything.
You didn't know that.
The amount of stuff that you can get...
I wonder if you can buy a live animal. Hold, please.
Are we finding out?
We're finding out right now.
That doesn't seem... Right?
Live mouse traps. Like, that would be... that would be wild if you're like...
buy a pet on Amazon.
Yeah, I got 2-day shipping on this macaw back here, and he'll say what's up to you in Spanish and English.
You can fast order animals with certain traits.
Oh, man. Think about how like Joe Exotic would feel. You know, be like, I get a tiger down here in 1-day shipping flat.
Carol Baskin killed her husband.
Back to delegating responsibilities. When you have all these different tasks that you're trying to accomplish, and you've got recording, editing, uploading to the hosting site, making sure then that it's posted, you have to create social media accounts. Are you going to use your personal one, or are you going to create a different one that's for professional use? And then make sure, are you linking all of them so you only have to post it one time, or do you have to post it multiple times? Who's going to be doing the posting? Who's going to be doing the recording? Who's going to be doing the editing? Who's going to be editing what? Because he edits the audio, I edit the videos, and we go from there. Now, sometimes he'll edit the videos because maybe, I don't know, I'm having nose surgery like I had this past week.
Yep.
My face looks a little swollen. It's because...
Or somebody has a tantrum and you have to go into dad mode, and you suddenly don't have the time to do the editing.
And I told Elizabeth she better not have any more tantrum. I'm just kidding. Elizabeth is like the farthest thing from any tantrum. She gets really quiet. She doesn't throw tantrums. But I throw tantrums.
I throw tantrums.
All that being said, you got to figure out who's going to throw the tantrum.
That's a valid point. Moving on.
We want to give you some encouragement. Ben, would you like to give the first encouragement? You have the first note on here.
I feel like we kind of just pinballed all the way around. So I just kind of want to recap real quick before we move on to the encouragement. So
it's a short version. Ready?
Short version, set, go. If you're recording by yourself, most likely it'll be easier if you're recording with somebody. If you are recording with somebody, things that you have to take into account are timing. How different is your life from the person that you are working with, and how does timing work with getting you both recording at the same time? Platforms, you have to decide what platforms you want to be on. Do you want to be on YouTube? Do you want, what do you want to do? You need to figure out. Yeah, what is it?
Stitcher.
That's a thing?
Stitcher, yeah.
Stitcher, is that like an up and coming thing?
It's an audio like podcast site.
Oh, interesting. Oh, okay, I didn't know that. So platforms, you got to choose your platform. You have to learn how that platform interacts with iTunes, how it interacts with Spotify. You have to figure out how to get whatever content you are going to produce out to the world. Speaking of content, you have to figure out what content that you're going to produce. Once you figure out the content, how are you going to capture it? Video, are you going to do video? Are you going to do audio? Once you capture it, how are you editing? So you have editing software, you've got video editing software, putting things together, putting together your finished product. What does that look like? And then delegating responsibilities. If you are doing it with a partner, who does what, when, where, how, why? And keeping that communication up, because I will say that I've had my viewpoints shifted because of really maintaining this podcast with you and how we've delegated responsibilities and how we have been communicative. Just getting this thing up and going has improved me just as a human being in general. With just handling...
This is news to me.
Oh, is it? Well, yeah. Just handling people, handling small things, because I'm in a business to where, like, I'm a sole proprietor. I don't have to deal with anybody else. And so you insert that, and I don't work in a corporate environment, so I don't know what it's like working with other people. So this is the closest thing that I have to that. So as an individual, it's really helped me just improve not only communication, but maybe seeing things from a different perspective. And that's what Micah is really good about, communicating his perspective without encroaching on your perspective. And then he does this thing where he gets into your perspective, and then he'll turn it, and then he'll sneak out, and then you're sitting there like,
I don't remember where I was.
What just happened? Like, I started this conversation. I've done it. I
started this conversation angry.
Yeah, I started this conversation. Yeah, no, we've had that conversation. I started a conversation heated, and by the end of it, I'm agreeing with Micah, and it's irritating. So There's a lot of moving parts within a podcast. You.
I'm sorry. I didn't realize I had this superpower.
Mike is very good at making people better human beings.
I just try to treat you like a human, and I don't ever want you to feel like you're less of a human being, so I just try to think like, okay, my priority is the relationship.
Right.
But sometimes, if you prioritize the relationship, that then requires you to step out in boldness and sometimes risk the relationship.
See, I don't think this in depth. Which is why
this is why I go to counseling.
Well, so this is why I'm learning things, is because my brain doesn't usually go to where your brain does. It's because of how we're wired differently. So,
accurate.
Anyhow, it's a lot of work is the short story. It's a lot of work.
It's a relationship, so it takes work.
What? Making
us
a
working
podcast?
on
Oh, yeah. And just, content, audio, video, production. I mean, this is... Literally, if I were to scan the room, we've got lights everywhere. We've got equipment everywhere. It's not a simple hit play and record, and then you're going to become famous or you're going to make an impact immediately. It's take your time, do the right things, and really learn what you're getting yourself into, and then decide if that's what you want to do.
I totally agree. I talk in a lot of metaphors, analogies, figurative language.
It's a metaphor.
It's provocative. But even Elizabeth, like, she used to say, you would venture out in a left field and I'd just kind of go, where did he go? And you'd start talking about something that has nothing to do with whatever we were just talking about. But then somehow we land right back on it, and I now understand completely what you were talking about. It's because I don't just like venture off. What's your vector, Victor? I don't just venture off in a new vector. I will, like, if this is the conversation, I'll venture out and I'll circle all the way back to that point. It's just a teaching skill. I didn't have it when I first started teaching. It wasn't something I just naturally was gifted with. But here's my metaphor for you. If you're thinking about starting a podcast right now, or a YouTube channel, or a radio show, or whatever it may be, you have to figure out, do you want to play the drums, or do you want to figure out and learn how to play the drums?
Oh, that's good.
Because there's a big difference. I'm a drummer, so that's why I'm using this as an example. If you told me, Micah, I want to play the drums, I would say, good luck. Because you're gonna get blisters on. I've got calluses, not so much right now. I haven't played in a while, but you get calluses in weird spots. You get muscles that, like, what even is this muscle? I didn't have that prior to drumming. Ben doesn't really have it.
Oh, both sides are little though.
And then on the front of your shins, like all these kinds of things. So you may have the desire to play the drums, but it doesn't work like the Matrix. You can't just plug in and be like, hey, I need to know how to fly this helicopter. And you know how to fly the helicopter. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
So if you want to have a podcast, if you want to have a YouTube channel, if you want to have some sort of content creation of your own, you have to decide for yourself if you're willing to step through the mud until you get to solid ground. You have to decide if you're willing to get the blisters that lead to the calluses for you to do that job efficiently. Because it takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of time. Having the conversations with my wife, having to tell my kids, hey, I can't talk right now. Like, I got to go record for the podcast. My 3-year-old doesn't always understand that, so she gets offended. Sometimes she's like, but Daddy, I want to hang out. I'm telling you right now, I will stop what I'm doing and go hang out with my child if she feels hurt by me. But you've got to be willing to have those conversations. You've got to be willing to walk through that. So if you're not ready to do that, don't have a podcast. Don't even start, because you're not ready to put in the hard work that it's going to take to make something sustainable. And you're going to have about 3 different episodes, and then you're toast. So if you're not going to sign up for the long haul, just don't.
Yeah.
Just don't waste your money. It takes a lot of money to have all the different equipment. I'm going to do this. It's probably going to mess up things, but it costs money to buy even the boom stand and the microphone that are right here. Okay. So don't spend your money, and don't even start. Don't waste your time.
Don't commit don't do it unless you can commit.
There you go.
Is the point behind that? And I would add to that, something that I feel that people do is so often you see these viral videos on whatever platform that you're on. You're like, oh, I could do that. And then you go to make said video, or you go to, your viral sensation or whatever. And the reality of the situation is that if there's something on the internet that's been done before and you've seen it, most of the time people don't find like the excitement when there's not originality, when it's something that they've seen before. So don't be afraid to be you. Something that I struggled with for the longest time. Don't be afraid. Actually, the note right here says, "Do you boo boo?" And it's exactly what exactly what it says. Do you be you? Don't try to be like somebody else. More often than not, when you're trying to put out content that is like something else, guess what? You're gonna always be in that shadow. You're gonna always be in, you're trying to be like this. Own you, and that's something that I've struggled with, is owning my personality. Like, I'm quirky and I'm weird, and you know what? It's okay, and I don't care.
Yeah.
And owning that, I think people are more drawn to originality than they are, just another, what's the term, dime a dozen. People are drawn to originality over the dime a dozen mentality. So be you.
I would say my unique trait that kind of led to this podcast creation is that I don't really worry about talking about tough topics. I talk about them pretty conversationally.
Right.
I've told plenty of people that I deal with depression. I told my students, I was like, hey, just so y'all know, I deal with depression. Here's how it affects me. And here's what I've had to deal with, and here are the steps that I've taken. So if you're dealing with that, let me know.
And how many kids took you up on that offer?
Probably...
You answered my question already. That was it?
And I had other teachers that would be like, why would you tell them that? Like, why would I not tell them that? So that's a trait of mine. I'm a pretty open book. I know that there are things between Elizabeth and me that I don't share with anybody else. And the longer I've been married, the more I do that intentionally, because I see that it strengthens our bond. And there's a level of depth that I do not go to with anybody else. So even though what you may listen to on this podcast, even the conversations between Ben and me, you may think that that's really deep. To me, it's not. But that's my personality.
Yeah.
To me, there's a whole other, you're on the first floor and you thought it was the basement. Okay. But in reality, there's actually the basement and then the silo underneath the basement. And that's where Elizabeth and I go, to that depth. So that's my personality trait. I'm also a teacher by heart. Like I just mentioned, I had a bunch of metaphors and I'll loop all over the place and come back to it. But nonetheless, that's my personality type. So own it. Just own it. So ultimately, yes, this is like a trick podcast. This is like Michael Scott. What are my weaknesses? I care too much. I work too hard, and gosh dang it, people like me. That's like from an old SNL skit.
What's the other one?
Do I want to be feared? Yes. I want people to be afraid of how much they love me.
Truth.
So
Truth.
Anyway, this is a trick podcast. If you listen to all this and you're like, I'm freaking in, guess what? We're here for you any way that we can help. No, we're not what we would consider professionals, but it is what we do. So if there's anything we could add to your life and add value by doing whatever, we want to help. We're going to be putting out a video here shortly. We're going to put out all the different equipment that we use to try to help you. If you've watched this and you're like, let's freaking go, then you can go to that one and just start clicking, put them on your Amazon cart, full circle there, put them on your Amazon cart, and you're done. And by clicking those links, guess what? You support this podcast.
Yeah. Or you could get on the social medias, reach out and ask, like literally, hey, I've run into this issue. What do you guys think about it? I'll either know or I won't. Or either way, ask a question. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll either know or I'll know somebody that knows, and we'll find an answer for you.
Yeah.
So that's what we got for you. Be sure to share, like this video. If you know friends that have been trying to start up their own thing for a while, and I know some of you watching this have been the people that have been asking me. So you need to share with them. Just let them know, here's the honest truth. You do not need to start a podcast. And then other people, you might need to encourage them. Be the person that encourages them and say, hey, you know what? I know this is going to be really tough, but you got this. That's about it that we have for you. I'm out.
I guess we're done.
Hey, MVP family, thank you so much for tuning into our episode today. If you're listening on the podcast, we really appreciate it. Feel free to share with anybody and everybody. We create this podcast ultimately for all of you that are listening and even the people that haven't listened, which is why we love for you to share generously to all who will listen. Also, if you want to stay connected with us, we love connection, we love family, we love community. The ways you can stay connected with us are through Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of those at actual MVP. And finally, if you want to really watch what we're doing, go to YouTube and search Micah and Ben Podcast and be sure to subscribe there. As always, we'd love for you to get your Audible 30-day trial for free. Free 99. That is our gift to you. So be sure to educate yourself, be reading up on all the books that we mentioned on the show, and do it today. We love you guys. Y'all take care.